Liberia is one of the most unusual countries in Africa because it was not created by the local people or European colonizers, but by the United States, a nation that had kept people in slavery for many years, and when slavery was finally being abolished, some of the freed people were simply shipped away since the authorities and wealthy citizens did not want them living nearby. So they were put on boats and sent across the ocean to Africa, where they landed with nothing. No homes, no food, no protection, and they began building a new life on foreign soil, bringing their customs, language, clothing, and ways of government, opening schools and churches, doing everything as it was done in America. While the local tribes who had always lived there were never asked, and soon the newcomers took over the land, the laws, the power, making the natives strangers in their own country, and from the very beginning, Liberia was divided between those who ruled and those who obeyed, a division that has not fully disappeared even today.
200 years ago, believe it or not, slaves arrived in Africa. Fortunately, by that time, they were already former slaves and have returned to build their own free country. This experiment is still ongoing, and it's not exactly going well.
When Liberia was founded, two completely different worlds appeared at once. The descendants of those who had been transported from the United States had their own schools, clothes, religion, laws, and brick houses. They spoke English and filled all the important positions, while the local tribes continued to live as they had for centuries, in villages and simple huts tied to the land they had always known. And these two groups rarely mixed because the locals were excluded from government, denied education, and had no way to influence decisions, told that they were citizens but treated as second-class people, with the government caring only about the capital while ignoring the countryside, where there were no hospitals, no schools, and no electricity. So people survived however they could, and the gap between the two groups grew wider every year, laying the foundation for hatred and conflicts that would later explode and tear the country apart. Years passed, but power never changed hands. And the descendants of those brought from across the ocean continued to control every decision, living richer and closer to power while the natives stayed in poverty, until at some point, the people had simply had enough. Anger filled the country, and soldiers, officials, and ordinary residents of poor neighborhoods no longer wanted to accept it. So one day, there was an uprising. As armed men stormed the palace and removed the rulers who had been in charge for decades, and everyone thought justice would finally come and real change would arrive. But instead, fear took over. Because the new leaders acted brutally, staging public executions of former officials, starting repressions, and many realized that the old injustice had only been replaced with a new one, leaving the country trapped once again. After the coup, no one could hold the situation together, and the nation split even further as different regions fell under the control of their own commanders and groups, with some seeking revenge and others seeking power. And soon, people picked up weapons and attacked neighboring villages, destroying entire communities, starting a real war where even children were forced to fight after being kidnapped and trained to shoot and commit acts no child should ever face. While houses were burned, others fled into the forests, and survivors told stories so horrifying they sent chills down the spine, while refugee numbers grew so fast that the camps could not keep up. Nowhere felt safe, the police and army lost all control, and this was not simply a war between two sides, but the complete collapse of society, with each day bringing more deaths and more destruction and no end in sight. Just when it seemed nothing could be worse, the first war ended, but before the country could even take a breath, another conflict began. Only this time, people fought not against the government, but against each other, with former allies turning into enemies as old grudges resurfaced, and everyone wanted control of territory, resources, and influence. So thousands died, cities burned again, villages lived in fear through sleepless nights, and if you heard the sound of cars at night, you knew it might be your last evening, as no family was spared. Some losing parents, others children, others their homes, and refugees crossed borders on foot without food or documents. While help was scarce and in some places, the Second War was even worse than the first. And those who survived both said that the second time there was no hope left at all, only a desperate struggle just to stay alive. When the gunfire finally stopped, the country looked like a vast ruin with destroyed cities, broken roads, burned schools, and empty hospitals. And although people emerged from the forests and returned to their villages, many had lost everything. Living in tents, sleeping on the ground, and searching through ruins for food, often without even documents since everything had burned. So peace did come, but it did not feel like victory, more like a pause between disasters as the government tried to restore order but had no money and life functioned only thanks to humanitarian aid, with foreigners in uniforms arriving under different flags, bringing water, medicine, and temporary shelters, while some regions still remained under local warlords. And people waited in fear for the shooting to start again, but it didn't. And that fragile, uncertain calm was called peace. After the war, it became clear that Liberia was not just a poor country, but one where almost nothing worked. Not because people were lazy, but because there was no functioning system. And while the capital still had some electricity and a few roads, in the countryside, people lived without power, without water, without doctors, walking for hours or riding trucks just to reach the next village, while children often missed school because it was too far away. And many died from simple diseases because medicine was unavailable, with government services like courts, police, and documents existing only on paper. And those with connections could get things done quickly, while the rest either waited endlessly or gave up. And even after the war ended, corruption never disappeared, with people still afraid to go to the authorities, not out of fear of punishment, but because they knew they would get no real help. A few years after the war, just as the country had begun to recover a little, a new disaster struck, in the form of an epidemic that spread quickly as people got sick and died, while no one knew how to respond, with hospitals overflowing, doctors unable to cope, and many refusing to work out of fear of infection. While the sick often died before reaching medical help, sometimes even on the streets, as relatives buried their loved ones in haste, sometimes in their own yards, schools and markets closed, families locked themselves in their homes, fear ruled every decision. Food supplies shrank, and aid was slow, and no one expected that after war, the country would be so vulnerable. But the epidemic proved that even without weapons, an entire nation can collapse if it is already hanging by a thread. In Liberia, poverty means more than just a lack of money. It means a lack of everything. No work, with jobs almost impossible to find even in the capital. No stable income, with many surviving by selling goods on the street or working on plantations for less than $1 a day. And no security for the future, since prices can rise overnight, food can run out, and transport can disappear, while villages have no shops, no doctors, no fuel, and people grow what they can and trade with each other, repairing shoes to wear for another year, treating illness with herbs, and children walking miles if they want to learn, though often poverty here is not temporary but generational, with people born into it, living in it, and dying in it. To be a child in Liberia means struggling for survival from the earliest years, with games played among ruins, in the dust, or near garbage dumps, while schools are overcrowded, teachers are too few, and textbooks are scarce, sometimes forcing 3 groups of students to share one classroom by taking turns, or to study under a tree. While in villages, many children do not attend school at all because they must work in the fields or care for siblings, with girls often dropping out early to marry too young, and boys taking jobs or falling into street gangs because there is no choice. As the war left scars, and many teenagers grew up surrounded by violence and poverty, with no role models to follow. So, even if a child dreams of becoming a doctor, teacher, or engineer, in most cases it remains only a dream, not because they lack ability, but because life's conditions are too harsh.
Liberia could have been a paradise with its tropical climate, dense jungles, rare animals, rivers, waterfalls, and long coastline. But all of this is disappearing as people cut down forests because they need fuel to cook food, material to build houses, or wood to sell cheaply just to survive. And this is not done out of malice, but out of poverty. Yet where once stood trees and wildlife, there is now only bare soil and ash, ecosystems destroyed, rainfall growing worse, so that where there used to be storms, there are now floods washing away homes, breaking roads, and ruining harvests. While the soil grows weaker, the heat intensifies, mosquitoes spread disease, and people blame nature. Though it is not nature's fault, but the fact that it can no longer cope. Since once the trees protected the land, but now they are gone, even the ocean has become an enemy as rising waters swallow coastal areas, with locals describing how year after year the sea eats away the very streets they grew up on. And this is not a distant threat, but something happening every year, ever closer, so those living near the shore no longer build solid houses for fear of losing them. Yet they cannot leave because they have nowhere and nothing to move to. And so they are left only to watch their land vanish beneath their feet.
Liberia has endured too much. Slavery, resettlement, injustice, coups, wars, epidemics, and poverty, all within a single century. Far too much pain for one nation, and today its people live in constant waiting for life to get easier, for jobs to appear, for schools to finally get textbooks, for someone to take rebuilding seriously. But as the years pass, change is hardly visible, so those who can leave do so, while those who cannot stay and survive, and the youth dream of a future they cannot see, since no one wants to start life from zero in a broken country with no roads, no rules, and no justice. Yet there is no other choice, and still, despite it all, Liberia endures, because its people are used to never giving up, building with clay where there is no brick, making light from solar panels where there is no power grid, planting trees where forests were cut down, and helping one another without money. And that is true heroism. Not loud speeches, but ordinary life in a place where the conditions make it nearly impossible. And although hope here is fragile, it still exists. Because if they survived all this, then something better might still be possible ahead.